I think as much as being substantial military move, I think it's quite emblematic. I think the Israelis want to show the world and the public and the Gazans and Hamas that they can actually take control of that crossing. I've just seen a few minutes ago some fairly dramatic pictures released by the Israeli army, the Israeli media, of Israeli tanks going in right to the south to that Rafah crossing, with not a person in sight, no resistance. And so I think the Israelis wanted to show that we can take control from the very north 7 months ago all the way down to the south of the Gaza Strip. And I think this is running in tandem with Hamas trying to prove that they still have military capability by firing those rockets the other day that killed 4 Israeli soldiers. And the third track happening at the same time is the Israelis, this is breaking news, the Israelis are resuming those negotiations in Cairo, which are being brokered by the head of the CIA, William Burns. So there's the 3 different tracks all happening at the same time.
Would that indicate, if you drew all 3 together, that best case scenario, we are entering potentially the final phases here, at least in the IDF's plan, even if not in Hamas's?
I think so, Greg. I've been in Gaza during one war where the ceasefire came in, and for the last 20 minutes before the ceasefire, which was 6 a.m. Sydney time, there was an incredible flurry of military activity, of rockets going from Gaza, of rockets coming in from Israel. It was absolutely a cacophony of missiles. And I think what we're seeing now, based on previous wars, is I think as it gets towards a ceasefire, in the 4 wars I've covered between Israel and Gaza, there is this increased activity. And the Israelis are not going in at the moment on the ground and bombing and destroying. They're hitting from the air, but the tanks are essentially going in with Israeli flags, waving the flags on the top of the tanks, almost as if to say, we've made it. Now let's find out what goes on in Cairo. And I think with the President of the United States making phone calls, the head of the CIA, I think we're in the final lap.
That's very interesting. What are your observations about the humanitarian situation over the last 24 hours, John? We discussed almost literally this time yesterday the warnings that the IDF were posting with Gazans or residents of Rafah at the moment. Do you think they were heeded?
Well, Greg, it is chaotic there. There's about 600,000 children in Rafah. Half of the population of Gaza are children, and therefore half of the 1.2 million people trapped in Rafah are children. And the humanitarian situation is absolutely catastrophic. Famine has taken hold. Children are dying all the time. And the idea of them moving in an orderly fashion out of eastern Rafah up to the beach there. And the Israelis keep talking about all the hospitals they've constructed. If they have constructed a single hospital, I would like to see a photograph of it. When I look at the photos carefully, all I see are tents. And so it's a dreadful humanitarian situation. And in fact, it's getting worse in this flurry too, because the Rafah crossing is now closed, so there's no trucks at all coming in there, and the Kerem Shalom crossing is closed. So essentially, it's a desperate situation, and no humanitarian aid to speak of is coming into Gaza at the moment.
All right, and just to follow through on the concept that we might be entering a final phase with 3 strands of Israeli strategy coming together here, John, just outline the fate of hostages, how they would be stitched into any compromise that might be finally clinched in the near term.
Well, Greg, one of the dilemmas for Israel having a full ground invasion of Rafah, although they believe there are many Hamas fighters there, they also believe that a lot of those hostages are in Rafah. This is the final stronghold, if you like, of Hamas. That's probably where a lot of those hostages are held. There's still 136 hostages kept in Gaza. The IDF suggests about 30 to 40 of those tragically have died. So there's still 80 or 85 live hostages that we know of. And so any deal, any ceasefire would be the immediate release of those 135, 36 hostages and bodies. So Israel, that's a big pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu inside Israel. The pressure from the families and the demonstrations to get those hostages home is becoming almost intolerable for him. That's greater pressure on him than the pressure from the United States.
Yeah, very difficult situations. And just on that last point, pressure from the United States, would you expect further interventions in this phase that we've entered now? I mean, really top-level phone calls from the President down?
Well, Greg, I think it's much the same as it has been through the 7 months of this war. The United States may criticise Israel, call its bombing indiscriminate, but keep providing every day, keep providing the bombings to do that indiscriminate bombing. So I think there'll be no real change. But when you have the head of the CIA and the President of the United States making phone calls saying, get this deal done, I think it adds pressure.